She treated him like a beggar because of his clothes, but he was the billionaire who signed her checks. Before we begin this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing where our stories reach. The Grand Celestial Hotel wasn't just a building. It was a universe unto itself. Its lobby was a cathedral of wealth, a hushed temple where the gods of finance and fame came to rest. Sunlight, filtered through colossal two-story windows, danced on marble floors so polished they mirrored the crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen constellations from the frescoed ceiling. The air itself seemed different here, scented with a faint, expensive mixture of fresh lilies and old money. It was a world hermetically sealed from the grit and grime of the city outside, a place where reality was optional and appearances were everything. And at the gate of this gilded heaven stood Clara. To the untrained eye, Clara was the perfect receptionist. At 25, she was a vision of professional poise, her dark hair pulled back into a flawless chignon, her navy blue uniform tailored to perfection. Her smile was a work of art, bright, welcoming, and utterly insincere. It was a weapon she wielded with surgical precision, calibrated to charm the wealthy and intimidate the unworthy. For Clara, the reception desk was more than a job. It was a vantage point. From here, she studied the ecosystem of the elite, her mind a silent, running ledger of brands, watches, and last names. A Patek Philippe on the wrist, a genuine smile, and immediate attention. A scuff on a shoe, a curt nod, and a dismissive tone. Her world was a simple one, divided into two categories, those who had made it and those who hadn't. She belonged to the latter, a fact that burned in her with a quiet, relentless fire. She had grown up in a cramped apartment on the other side of town, a world of cracked pavement and secondhand clothes. The Grand Celestial was her escape, her ambition. She didn't just want to work here. She wanted to belong here. Every polite, "Good evening, sir," was a stepping stone. Every fawning compliment a rung on the ladder she was so desperately climbing. This ambition had hollowed her out, replacing empathy with a cold, hard pragmatism. She saw the guests not as people, but as symbols of the life she craved, and she despised anyone who reminded her of the world she had fought so hard to leave behind. Just then, the grand glass doors hissed open, and a man stepped inside who seemed to have wandered in from a different planet. He was around 30, with kind, observant eyes that seemed out of place amidst the lobby's calculated opulence. But it wasn't his eyes that Clara, or anyone else, noticed first. It was everything else. He wore a faded leather jacket over a simple gray t-shirt. His jeans were worn, and his hiking boots were caked with the dust of a city that the hotel's patrons only ever saw through the tinted windows of their limousines. On his back was a large, scuffed backpack, the kind a student or a traveler on a shoestring budget would carry. He paused for a moment, taking in the grandeur of the lobby not with awe, but with a quiet, assessing gaze. A hush seemed to fall over the immediate area. A woman dripping in diamonds pulled her child a little closer. A doorman who had just been smiling obsequiously at a departing guest now stood rigid, his expression a mask of disapproval. The man was a stain on the pristine canvas of the Grand Celestial, and every eye in the room registered it. Clara felt a surge of irritation. It was her job to maintain the hotel's impeccable image, to be the guardian of its exclusivity. This man was a breach of protocol, a problem to be dealt with swiftly and efficiently. Her professional smile hardened at the edges, becoming a sharp, impenetrable shield. Before she could act, her direct superior, Mr. Almeida, materialized at her side. He was a man who oozed a smarmy, self-important charm, his perfectly coiffed hair unmoving, his suit so tight it looked shrink-wrapped. He looked at the man with utter disdain, his lip curling slightly. "Clara," he murmured, his voice a low hiss, not turning his head. "What is that? We are not a charity shelter. The board members from the Tokyo branch are arriving in an hour. I want him gone. Be polite, but be firm. Tell him we're fully booked. Suggest the hostel down the street. I don't want his kind loitering in my lobby." "Of course, Mr. Almeida," Clara replied, her voice crisp. The manager's order was the justification she needed. She wasn't just being judgmental. She was following instructions. She watched as the man, Leo, slowly approached the counter, his steps unhurried, his eyes scanning every detail of the lobby. He seemed utterly unfazed by the cold stares directed his way. When he reached her desk, he offered a small, tired smile. "Good evening," he said, his voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I'd like a room for the night, please." Clara didn't even bother to look up from her computer screen. Her fingers tapped on the keyboard for a few performative seconds, the clicks echoing in the quiet space. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, her voice dripping with a practiced, impersonal regret. "But we are fully booked tonight. There's a citywide conference." It was a lie, and a lazy one at that, but for someone like him, she felt it was more than enough. Leo didn't move. He simply stood there, his calm gaze fixed on her. "Are you certain?" he asked politely. "I was just looking at your website a few minutes ago." It showed several available suites, including the presidential suite. Clara's fingers froze on the keyboard. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. How dare he question her? How dare this backpacker call her out on a lie? She finally lifted her head, her professional smile now sharp as a shard of glass. She looked him up and down, a slow, deliberate assessment designed to make him feel small, to remind him of his place. "Sir," she began, her voice sickeningly sweet, a velvet glove over an iron fist of contempt. "Our online systems can sometimes experience delays. The reality is we have no vacancies." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were doing him a favor. "Perhaps the Starlight Hostel, just a few blocks down, would be more suitable for your budget." The word suitable hung in the air, a perfectly crafted insult. It wasn't just about a lack of rooms. It was about his worth, his status, his entire existence. She was telling him, in the politest way possible, that he didn't belong. The humiliation was complete, delivered with a smile. She straightened up, expecting him to shrink away, defeated and embarrassed. But Leo didn't. He didn't flush with anger or stammer an apology. Instead, he simply looked at her, his eyes holding a depth she couldn't quite fathom. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of defeat. It was a smile of understanding, as if he had seen exactly what he had come here to see. "I see," he said softly. "Thank you for your assistance." Without another word, he turned away from the desk. But instead of leaving the hotel as she and Mr. Almeida had expected, he walked calmly over to one of the plush, empty sofas in a quiet corner of the lobby. He sat down, took a book out of his worn backpack, and began to read, as if he had all the time in the world. As if he, somehow, belonged there more than anyone. Clara watched him, a feeling of unease starting to creep frozen behind the polished marble counter. The game, a triumphant smirk plastered on might have just begun. She had handled the situation with the cool efficiency Mr. Almeida expected. The unwelcome guest, the backpacker, had been put in his place. Yet, as she watched him settle onto the plush velvet sofa, a piece of furniture that likely cost more than everything he owned, a strange and unsettling feeling began to prickle at the edges of her satisfaction. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't storming out in a huff of righteous indignation or slinking away in shame. He was simply sitting there, reading a paperback book, a picture of absolute, unshakable calm. It was an act of quiet defiance that was far more unnerving than any angry outburst could have been. Mr. Almeida glided back to her side, his posture rigid with disapproval. "What is he still doing here?" he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "I told you to get rid of him." "I did, sir," Clara replied, her confidence wavering slightly. "I informed him we have no vacancies and even suggested a more appropriate establishment." "Then why is he still polluting my lobby?" Mr. Almeida's eyes, small and hard like pebbles, were fixed on Leo. "He's an eyesore, a blight on our reputation. Imagine if the Japanese delegation arrives and sees that lounging on our furniture. It's unacceptable." He straightened his tie, a nervous tic Clara had come to recognize. "Keep an eye on him. If he so much as dozes off, call security. I want him gone." With that, he strode away, his polished shoes clicking in angry rhythm on the marble floor. Clara was left with a lingering sense of unease. Leo's presence was like a glitch in the perfect, ordered world of the Grand Celestial. He wasn't playing by the rules. He wasn't supposed to be this calm, this self-possessed. People like him were supposed to understand their place and retreat when confronted by the likes of her and Mr. Almeida. But Leo was different. He simply read his book, turning the pages slowly, occasionally looking up to observe the intricate dance of wealth and power that swirled around him. For the next hour, life in the lobby continued its choreographed performance. Bellhops in crisp uniforms wheeled gleaming luggage carts. Businessmen in tailored suits spoke in hushed, important tones into their phones. Women with surgically perfected faces and carrying handbags that cost as much as a small car drifted through the space like exotic birds. And through it all, Leo sat, a silent observer in their midst. He watched, but not with envy or awe. He watched with an analytical curiosity, his gaze taking in every detail. He saw Mr. Almeida fawning over a wealthy heiress, his smile so wide it looked painful, personally escorting her to the elevator. Minutes later, he saw the same Mr. Almeida berating a young busboy for a barely visible smudge on a brass railing, his voice sharp and cruel. The busboy, a kid who couldn't have been more than 18, flinched under the verbal assault, his face burning with shame. Then, a more dramatic scene unfolded. Dona Celia, a housekeeper who had worked at the hotel for over 20 years, was pushing her heavy cart across the lobby. She was a small, stooped woman with kind, weary eyes and hands worn rough by decades of hard work. As she navigated around a particularly ostentatious floral display, the wheel of her cart caught on the edge of the plush carpet. With a sickening crash, a tray of cleaning supplies and fresh linens tumbled onto the floor, scattering across the pristine marble. The sound shattered the lobby's serene atmosphere. Heads turned. Mr. Almeida, who was in the middle of a sycophantic conversation with a potential investor, spun around, his face a mask of pure fury. "You clumsy old woman," he shrieked, his voice echoing through the vast space. "Look what you've done. Are you blind? Do you have any idea how much this carpet costs to clean?" Dona Celia's face went pale. She scrambled to her knees, her hands trembling as she tried to gather the fallen items. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't see." "You didn't see? That's your only job. To see and to clean." He continued to berate her, his voice rising with every word. The guests watched, some with mild amusement, others with detached indifference. It was a spectacle, nothing more. Humiliation was just part of the evening's entertainment. Clara stood behind her desk, feeling a flicker of pity for the old woman, but she quickly suppressed it. It was not her place to interfere. In this world, you learn to look away. But someone didn't look away. From his corner sofa, Leo closed his book, placed it carefully beside him, and stood up. He walked across the lobby, his steps calm and deliberate, his presence cutting through the thick tension. He knelt beside Dona Celia, ignoring the furious glare of Mr. Almeida and the curious stares of the guests. "Let me help you with that," Leo said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the manager's shrill tones. He began picking up the scattered bottles and linens, his movements efficient and kind. Dona Celia looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, son. Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Who do you think you are?" Mr. Almeida snarled at Leo. "This is a staff matter. Get back to wherever it is you came from." Leo didn't even look at him. He continued helping the old woman, placing the last of the items back onto her cart. Once everything was secure, he helped her to her feet. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, looking directly into her eyes. Yes, I am. Thank you," she said, managing a small, grateful smile. Leo simply nodded. Then, and only then, did he turn to face the manager. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Mr. Almeida, a long, level stare that held no anger, no fear, only a quiet, unnerving assessment. Under that silent gaze, Mr. Almeida, for the first time, seemed to falter. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain his authority, but the silence from this stranger was more intimidating than any argument. Leo then turned and walked back to his sofa as calmly as he had left it. He picked up his book and resumed reading, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Clara watched the entire exchange, her heart beating a little faster. She had expected him to be a problem, a nuisance. She had not expected him to be a hero. She felt a confusing mix of emotions, annoyance at his audacity, but also a grudging, undeniable flicker of respect. He had done what no one else would have dared to do. He had shown kindness in a place where kindness was a foreign currency. A poor man playing at being a knight in shining armor, she muttered to herself, trying to dismiss the incident. But the image of his calm, compassionate intervention stayed with her. The quiet dignity with which he had stood up for the old housekeeper was a stark contrast to the performative, hollow politeness she practiced every day. The carefully constructed walls of her world, she realized, had just developed a very small but very real crack. She tried to return to her work, to the familiar rhythm of checking in the wealthy and dismissing the rest, but she found herself glancing over at the corner sofa again and again, where the man with the worn backpack and the unfathomable eyes continued to read his book, a silent and profound disruption in her perfectly ordered universe. An hour bled into two. The Grand Celestial's lobby continued its relentless performance of opulence. The sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, and the city lights began to glitter like a carpet of fallen stars, their reflection shimmering on the polished floors. Leo remained on the sofa, an island of stillness in a river of frantic, self-important activity. He had finished his book and now simply watched, his expression unreadable. Clara found his persistent presence increasingly unnerving. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, and in her world of predictable hierarchies, the unknown was a threat. Mr. Almeida, having recovered from his public confrontation, was now in full schmooze mode, laughing a little too loudly at a joke told by a portly man with a gold watch. The Japanese delegation was due any minute, and the manager was a bundle of nervous energy, his smile stretched so tight it looked like it might snap. Clara, too, felt the pressure. A visit from the International Board was a rare and significant event. Every detail had to be perfect, every interaction flawless. The presence of the backpacker was a discordant note in the symphony she and Mr. Almeida were trying to conduct. She kept her focus on her computer, processing reservations, answering calls, and greeting new arrivals with her practiced, dazzling smile. But her awareness was split. A part of her was constantly tracking the man on the sofa. Who was he? What did he want? Why wasn't he leaving? The questions circled in her mind, a frustrating distraction she couldn't shake. Suddenly, a chime from her computer signaled a new email. The subject line, written in bold, red letters, made her sit up straight. Urgent. Update on tonight's visit. Her heart skipped a beat. She clicked it open, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. It was from the corporate headquarters, from the executive assistant to the very top of the Anderson Hotel Group's global command. To all management staff at the Grand Celestial, please be advised of a change in schedule regarding tonight's assessment. Mr. Leonardo Anderson, the new majority shareholder and chairman of the board, has decided to conduct his preliminary evaluation incognito. In fact, he has been on site for the past several hours to gain an authentic, unvarnished perspective of the hotel's operations and guest experience. He will reveal his identity at his discretion. Please ensure all staff continue to perform their duties with the utmost professionalism. His final report will determine the future of the hotel's current management structure. Clara read the email once, then twice. The words swam before her eyes. Mr. Leonardo Anderson, new majority shareholder, has been on site for the past several hours, incognito. A cold, sickening dread washed over her, so intense it felt like a physical blow. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. She slowly, very slowly, lifted her head, her gaze drawn inexorably, magnetically, across the lobby to the man on the sofa. The man with the worn backpack. The man with the dusty boots. The man she had dismissed, belittled, and tried to expel. Leo. Leonardo Anderson. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The hushed chatter of the lobby, the clinking of glasses, the soft classical music, it all faded into a dull, roaring sound in her ears. She stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. The quiet confidence, the observant, intelligent eyes, the way he hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down. It all made a horrifying, perfect sense. He wasn't playing at being a hero when he helped Dona Celia. He was assessing the character of his staff. He wasn't asking about the broken air conditioning to be difficult. He was testing the knowledge of the front desk. He had been watching, evaluating, judging, and she had failed, miserably. Her carefully constructed world of appearances and status crumbled around her. The uniform that had felt like armor now felt like a straitjacket. The polished marble counter felt like the edge of cliff. She felt a wave of nausea and gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Mr. Almeida, oblivious, was still laughing with his guest. Clara knew she had to warn him. With trembling hands, she printed a copy of the email and walked, on legs that felt like they were made of jelly, over to her boss. Mr. Almeida, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You need to see this. Now. He shot her an annoyed look, irritated by the interruption. What is it, Clara? Can't you see I'm busy? She shoved the paper into his hand. Read it. He glanced at the paper, his smile faltering as he read. Clara watched as the color drained from his face. His jovial expression collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. His eyes darted wildly from the paper to the man on the sofa, then back again. For a moment, he looked like he was going to be sick. No, it can't be, he stammered, his voice a strangled gasp. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide with panic. What have we done? Before Clara could answer, before they could even begin to formulate a plan, the main doors of the hotel swung open. A group of about 6 people, all dressed in immaculate business attire, strode into the lobby with an air of purpose. The man at the front, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair, scanned the room, his eyes sharp and focused. Mr. Almeida straightened up, trying to compose himself, a desperate, sycophantic smile instantly appearing on his face. This must be the rest of the delegation. It was his chance to recover, to make a good impression. Welcome to the Grand Celestial, he exclaimed, rushing forward to greet them. We are so honored to have you. The silver-haired man, Carlos, barely glanced at him. His eyes swept the lobby, searching, until they landed on the man on the sofa. A look of immense relief washed over his face. Just as this was happening, Leo slowly closed his book, stood up, and began to walk towards the center of the lobby, right into the path of the approaching executives. Mr. Almeida, seeing this, felt a surge of panic-fueled rage. This was his last chance to fix things, to get the backpacker out of sight before it was too late. He had to reassert his authority. You, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. I thought I told you to leave. How dare you accost my esteemed guests? Security, he bellowed, his voice cracking. Get this vagrant out of my hotel immediately. If you've enjoyed the story so far and are eager for the twist, comment the word hotel so I know you're connected with us. Now, the story continues. 2 burly security guards, stationed near the entrance, moved forward, their faces grim. They began to close in on Leo, ready to physically remove him. Clara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. No, stop, she wanted to scream, but the words were trapped in her throat. The guards reached Leo, each grabbing one of his arms. But before they could drag him away, the silver-haired executive, Carlos, rushed forward, his face a picture of alarm. Stop! What are you doing? He commanded, his voice ringing with authority. Unhand him at once. The security guards froze, confused. Mr. Almeida looked utterly bewildered. Carlos ignored them all. He walked directly to Leo, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect that left the entire lobby speechless. Mr. Anderson, Carlos said, his voice filled with deference. My deepest apologies for the delay. There was an issue with traffic. We hope your preliminary evaluation has been illuminating. The words Mr. Anderson echoed through the vast, suddenly silent lobby. They hung in the air like a physical entity, a shock wave that rippled through the crowd of onlookers, distorting reality itself. For a moment, no one moved. The security guards still had their hands on Leo's arms, their faces a comical mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Mr. Almeida stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the sycophantic smile he had practiced all evening now melting into a grotesque mask of disbelief. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. It was one thing to read the truth in an email, a cold, abstract piece of information. It was another thing entirely to see it unfold before her eyes, to hear the name spoken with such reverence, to witness the absolute shift of power that occurred in that single, devastating second. The man she had condescendingly directed to a hostel, the man her boss had just tried to have thrown out like trash, was not just a guest. He was not just an investor. He was the king, and this was his kingdom. Leonardo Anderson calmly, almost gently, shrugged off the hands of the security guards. They retracted their arms as if they had just touched a live wire, their faces now pale with fear. They took a clumsy step back, suddenly desperate to become invisible. Leo's gaze, cool and unwavering, swept over the scene. He looked at the stunned executives, the terrified guards, and the gawking guests. Finally, his eyes landed on the petrified figure of Mr. Almeida. Illuminating is certainly the right word. Carlos, Leo said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. He took a slow step toward the manager, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Mr. Anderson. Almeida stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. He was wringing his hands, his face slick with a sheen of cold sweat. I had no idea. This is a terrible misunderstanding. A security test, of course. And you passed with flying colors, sir. An excellent test of our staff's vigilance. Leo's expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of something cold and sharp entered his eyes. A security test? He repeated, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine. Is that what you call it when you berate and humiliate your staff in front of an entire lobby of guests? He gestured toward Dona Celia, the elderly housekeeper, who was watching from a corner, her face a mixture of fear and awe. Is it a test when you scream at a woman who has given this company 20 years of her life over a few spilled cleaning supplies? Mr. Almeida flinched as if he'd been physically struck. I was simply maintaining standards, sir. Excellence is our motto. Excellence. Leo's voice dropped, becoming dangerously soft. Your idea of excellence is a broken air conditioner in the main lobby, which, I can assure you, is still broken. Your idea of excellence is a staff so terrified of you that they can barely perform their duties. Your idea of excellence is judging a person's worth based on the brand of their shoes rather than the content of their character. Each word was a precise, devastating blow. Mr. Almeida paled further, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Leo then turned his attention to the two security guards, who looked as if they wished the marble floor would swallow them whole. And you too, he said, his tone still quiet but now laced with steel. Your job is to protect the guests of this hotel, not to assault them on the whim of a tyrannical manager. You're a liability. Consider your employment terminated. The two men stood in stunned silence, their faces ashen. They didn't protest. They simply nodded, defeated, and began to walk slowly toward the staff exit. Their careers at the Grand Celestial finished in an instant. The lobby was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The remaining staff stood frozen, their eyes wide. The guests, who had been watching the drama unfold with detached amusement, now looked on with a mixture of shock and rapt attention. This was better than any Broadway show. Now, it was Clara's turn. Leonardo's gaze, which had been so sharp and cutting, softened almost imperceptibly as it fell upon her. She stood behind the reception desk, her hands gripping the marble edge so tightly her knuckles were white. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but the only ones that mattered were his. She couldn't breathe. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of her own words, her own actions, replaying in a horrifying loop. We are fully booked. Perhaps the hostel would be more suitable. The memory of her own condescending smile made her want to vomit. He started walking toward her. Each step he took echoed in the cavernous lobby, a slow, deliberate march that felt like a countdown to her own execution. She watched him approach, a tall, powerful figure who no longer wore the disguise of a humble backpacker. He was Leonardo Anderson, the man who held her entire future in the palm of his hand. She braced herself for the inevitable, for the cold, cutting words that would dismiss her, that would end her career and her dreams in a single, humiliating blow. He stopped directly in front of the reception desk, the polished marble a stark barrier between them. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face, and in their depths, Clara saw not anger, not triumph, but a profound, almost weary disappointment. And that was so much worse. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. She knew she had to say something, anything, but her throat was tight with shame. The professional composure she had cultivated for years had crumbled, leaving her exposed and terrified. The man she had judged so harshly, the man she had treated like dirt, was now her judge, jury, and executioner. And as he stood there, watching her, waiting, Clara knew with a sickening certainty that she had not only failed his test, but she had also failed a much more important one, the test of her own humanity. Her carefully constructed world had not just been cracked. It had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. The silence between them was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Clara felt the weight of every unspoken accusation, every judgmental glance she had ever given, pressing down on her. She had built her entire identity around the pristine, impenetrable facade of the Grand Celestial, and now, under the calm, disappointed gaze of Leonardo Anderson, that identity was dissolving into nothing. The shame was so potent, so overwhelming, that it was a physical sensation, a bitter taste at the back of her throat. She had to break the silence. She had to own the ugliness of her actions, even if it was the last thing she ever did in this lobby. Summoning a shred of courage from the depths of her humiliation, she finally met his eyes. Her own were swimming with unshed tears. "Mr. Anderson," she began, and the sound of her own voice, trembling and small, was foreign to her. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "There are no excuses for my behavior. None. I was unprofessional, I was cruel, and I was wrong." She took a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the marble counter, unable to bear the intensity of his stare any longer. "I accept my dismissal. I deserve it. I'm so deeply sorry." The confession hung in the air, a raw and painful admission of failure. She had said it. She had faced the consequences of her own arrogance. Now, all that was left was the final, inevitable verdict. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the words that would end it all. "You're fired." But they didn't come. Instead, a different voice cut through the tension. "Sir? Mr. Anderson." Clara opened her eyes. It was Donna Celia, the elderly housekeeper. She had stepped forward from the small crowd of staff, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, but her expression was resolute. Mr. Almeida, standing nearby, shot her a look of pure venom, as if willing her to be silent, but the old woman ignored him. "Sir," she said again, her voice clear and steady as she addressed Leonardo. "What that girl did was wrong. Very wrong. But she's not like him." She pointed a trembling but defiant finger at Mr. Almeida. "I've worked here for a long time. I see things. He enjoys being cruel. He taught all the young ones that kindness is weakness, that only money matters." She then turned her gaze to Clara, and her expression softened with a surprising flicker of empathy. "This one," she said, her voice dropping. "She was just trying to survive in the world he created. She was following the rules of his rotten game. I've seen her be kind when he wasn't looking. I saw her help a lost child find his parents last week. I saw her give her own lunch to a busboy who had forgotten his." Clara stared at Donna Celia, speechless. She had no idea the old woman had ever noticed those small, fleeting moments of decency. They were moments she had allowed herself when she thought no one was watching, small acts of rebellion against the cold, hard persona she was forced to wear. Leonardo listened to the housekeeper's testimony, his expression thoughtful. He looked from Dona Celia's earnest face back to Clara's, which was now streaked with silent tears of shock and shame. He saw not just the arrogant receptionist, but the young woman who was a product of a toxic environment, a woman who had just been defended by the very person her boss had tried to crush. Finally, he turned his attention back to the sputtering, apoplectic figure of Mr. Almeida. "Ew," Leonardo said, and the single word was filled with a chilling finality. "You are the poison in this hotel. You have fostered a culture of fear, elitism, and cruelty. You value a guest's bank account more than a staff member's dignity. You are everything that is wrong with this company." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out. Now." Mr. Almeida's face went from red to a pasty white. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I have connections." "And I," Leonardo replied calmly, "own the company that signs your paycheck. Or rather, used to." Defeated, Mr. Almeida stood there for a moment, his face a mess of impotent rage, before the same guards he had summoned earlier, now looking grimly satisfied, stepped forward to escort him away. As he was led out, a smattering of applause broke out from the assembled staff, a spontaneous and cathartic release of years of pent-up resentment. With the manager gone, Leonardo's focus returned to the two women standing before him. He walked over to Dona Celia and took her hand. "Thank you for your courage and your honesty, ma'am," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. "It seems this hotel has been in desperate need of new leadership. The position of head of housekeeping is now open, and I believe you're the most qualified person for the job. It comes with a significant raise and the authority to ensure all your staff are treated with the dignity they deserve." Dona Celia looked as if she might faint. Tears of joy streamed down her weathered cheeks. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," Leonardo said with a small smile. "Yes, of course yes. Thank you, sir," she sobbed, overwhelmed with gratitude. Now, only Clara remained. The lobby had slowly started to return to a semblance of normalcy, but she was still trapped in her own personal storm. She had confessed. She had apologized. She had prepared for the worst. Leonardo walked back to the reception desk, the marble barrier still between them. He looked at her, his expression serious once more. "Dona Celia is right," he said quietly. "What you did was wrong. It was a reflection of a culture I intend to eradicate from this organization. You judged me, you dismissed me, and you lied to me, all because of the clothes I was wearing." Clara braced herself. This was it. But, he continued, and her head snapped up, she was also right about something else. "You're not like him. I saw the conflict in your eyes. I saw your hesitation. And just now, I saw you take responsibility for your actions without making a single excuse. That, Clara, takes character." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I don't need employees who are perfect. I need employees who can learn, who can grow, and who have the capacity for empathy, even if it's been buried under a mountain of ambition and fear." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower for her ears only. "I'm not going to fire you, Clara." The words took a moment to register. She stared at him, her mind unable to process the reprieve. "You or not." "No," he said, "but things are going to change. Your job is no longer to be a gatekeeper for the wealthy. It's to be a host for all our guests. Your performance will no longer be judged by how well you flatter a billionaire, but by how much dignity and respect you show to everyone who walks through those doors, from a CEO to a housekeeper." He straightened up, his tone becoming formal again, though the warmth hadn't entirely left his eyes. "You are on probation, effective immediately. Your new direct supervisor will be Dona Celia. You will learn from her what true service and true class really look like. Do you understand?" Clara could only nod, the lump in her throat too large to speak. She had been given something she never expected, something she was sure she didn't deserve: a second chance. The humiliation she had felt moments ago was slowly being replaced by a wave of profound, humbling gratitude. The journey ahead would be difficult. She would have to unlearn years of bad habits and toxic ambition. She would have to earn back her own self-respect, piece by painful piece. But as she looked at Leonardo Anderson, she knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, and a new, more difficult, but infinitely more meaningful one was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the Grand Celestial Hotel underwent a quiet revolution. The air, once thick with a cloying mixture of fear and forced deference, began to feel lighter, more breathable. The change started from the top down. Leonardo Anderson, far from being an absentee owner, was a constant, observant presence. He walked the halls not as a king inspecting his domain, but as a craftsman examining his work, speaking to bellhops, kitchen staff, and maintenance workers with the same level of interest and respect he gave to his board members. His most significant change, however, was the empowerment of Dona Celia. The elderly housekeeper, now head of housekeeping, blossomed in her new role. She moved with a newfound confidence, her weary eyes now shining with purpose. She managed her department with a firm but compassionate hand, advocating for better working conditions, fair schedules, and, most importantly, a culture of mutual respect. The staff, who had once worked under the constant threat of Mr. Almeida's explosive temper, now performed their duties with a quiet pride. The hotel, in turn, began to run more smoothly than ever before. For Clara, this new era was a daily exercise in humility. Reporting to Dona Celia was, at first, a humbling experience. She, who had once seen herself as intellectually and socially superior, was now taking direction from a woman she had previously viewed as little more than part of the background. But under the old woman's patient guidance, Clara began to learn. She learned the names of every member of the cleaning staff, heard their stories, and understood the hard work that went into making the hotel's glamour possible. Dona Celia didn't preach. She led by example, teaching Clara that true service wasn't about fawning over the rich, but about offering genuine kindness and dignity to everyone. Her interactions with Leonardo were infrequent and strictly professional, yet they were charged with an unspoken significance. He would occasionally stop by the front desk, not to check up on her, but to ask a simple question or make a quiet observation. "Good morning, Clara. How is the new check-in system working?" he asked one day, his tone neutral. "It's much more efficient, Mr. Anderson. The staff finds it very intuitive," she replied, keeping her gaze professional, though her heart beat a little faster. "Good," he said with a simple nod, before moving on. Each of these brief encounters was a test, and Clara knew it. She worked tirelessly, not to impress him, but to prove to herself that she was worthy of the second chance he had given her. She treated every guest, from the backpacker who had genuinely wandered in by mistake to the tech billionaire on the top floor, with the same unwavering courtesy and respect. Her smile, once a sharp, calculated weapon, was slowly becoming genuine. She was discovering that there was a deeper satisfaction in offering authentic kindness than there had ever been in performing hollow reverence. About a month into her probation, Leonardo called her to his penthouse office. It was the first time they had been alone together since that fateful night. Clara entered the office, her nerves on edge, prepared for a formal review of her performance. "Please, have a seat," Leonardo said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. The room was grand, with a breathtaking view of the city, but it felt less like a seat of power and more like a personal space. "Clara," he began, foregoing any small talk, "I've been reviewing the weekly performance reports, and I've spoken with Dona Celia at length. She tells me you have been an exemplary employee, diligent, respectful, and eager to learn." "I'm just trying to do my job, sir," Clara said quietly. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I believe people can change, Clara, but it's rare to see someone embrace it with such commitment. You haven't just changed your behavior. You seem to be changing who you are." Clara looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. I'm learning what's actually important." "And what is that?" he asked, his voice soft, genuinely curious. "Dignity," she answered without hesitation. Treating people with it and having it myself. I realized my ambition wasn't to be successful. It was just to be seen as successful by people who didn't matter. I was chasing their approval so hard that I lost my own self-respect. Leonardo nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding in his eyes. That's a lesson that many people, including myself, have taken a lifetime to learn. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them. The professional barrier had momentarily dissolved, leaving two people who had, in their own ways, been humbled by their experiences. Your probation is over, Leonardo said finally. The front desk manager position is officially yours. Not because you've earned back my trust, but because you've earned your own. Tears of relief and gratitude welled up in Clara's eyes. It was more than a promotion, it was a validation. It was the closing of a painful chapter and the true beginning of a new one. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, she whispered. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Call me Leo, he said with a small, genuine smile. And you're welcome, Clara. That conversation marked a turning point. The formal distance between them began to ease into a comfortable, respectful friendship. They would often cross paths in the hotel, sharing brief conversations that were no longer about work but about life. Leo discovered Clara had a sharp, dry wit and a passion for classic literature. Clara discovered that Leo, despite his immense wealth, was a man of simple tastes who preferred a walk in the park to a gala dinner and who possessed a deep, thoughtful intelligence that had nothing to do with his balance sheet. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves as the only two patrons in the hotel's quiet library. Leo was reading a history book, and Clara was sketching in a small notebook, a hobby she had recently rediscovered. I never knew you could draw, Leo said, noticing the intricate cityscape taking shape on her page. Clara smiled, a little shyly. It's just something I do to relax. It helps me see the world differently, to notice the details instead of just the big picture. I know what you mean, he said, closing his book. That's how I felt when I first came here, wearing that backpack. I was trying to see the details, to see what this place was really like without the Mr. Anderson filter. And what did you see? She asked, her curiosity piqued. He looked at her, his gaze direct and honest. I saw a beautiful hotel with a rotten soul. And I saw a brilliant, capable young woman who had been taught to value the wrong things. He paused, his smile fading into something more serious. And I saw someone I couldn't get out of my head. Clara's heart skipped a beat. The air in the library suddenly felt charged, intimate. The sound of the rain against the window was the only thing that broke the silence. Leo, she began, but didn't know how to finish. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. I know things are complicated, but I wanted you to know what I feel for you. It's not the whim of a billionaire owner. It started the night I saw you stand up to me, and it's only grown as I've gotten to know the real Clara. She looked at him, at his kind, intelligent eyes, and realized with a startling clarity that the fear and insecurity that had held her back for so long were finally gone. She was no longer the arrogant receptionist trying to survive, and he was no longer the mysterious owner testing her. They were just two people, brought together by the strangest of circumstances, who had helped each other find a better version of themselves. I feel it too, Leo, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and filled the quiet library with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace crackling in the corner. In that moment, surrounded by old books and the gentle sound of the rain, they both knew that their story was far from over. It was just getting started. 1 year later, the Grand Celestial Hotel was almost unrecognizable, not in its appearance, but in its soul. The opulence was still there, the chandeliers still sparkled, but the oppressive, judgmental atmosphere had been replaced by a genuine warmth that radiated from the staff. It had become a place known not just for its luxury, but for its humanity, a reputation that, paradoxically, attracted an even more exclusive and loyal clientele. At the helm of this transformation was Clara. As the hotel's general manager, she led with an empathy and integrity that had become her trademark. She knew every staff member's name, celebrated their successes, and listened to their struggles. She had implemented training programs focused on emotional intelligence and dignity in service, initiatives that were now being adopted by other hotels in the Anderson Group worldwide. The ambitious girl who had once dreamed of belonging to the world of the elite had instead reshaped that world to fit a better, kinder vision. She stood in the center of the bustling lobby, no longer a gatekeeper, but a true host. Her tailored suit was just as impeccable as her old uniform, but her smile was now completely, effortlessly real. She was greeting a young family, their children wide-eyed with wonder. She knelt to speak to the youngest child, making him giggle, a simple act of connection that Mr. Almeida would have considered beneath him. Watching her from the far end of the lobby was Leo. His love for her had only deepened over the past year. Their relationship had blossomed away from the pressures of the hotel, built on quiet dinners, long walks in Central Park, and endless conversations where they discovered the endless, fascinating layers of each other's minds. He was no longer the disguised backpacker or the intimidating CEO. He was simply Leo, a man deeply in love with a remarkable woman. He walked over to her, his own smile mirroring hers. "Everything looks perfect, Madam Manager," he said, his voice laced with affection and pride. Clara stood up, her eyes sparkling as she looked at him. "It takes a good team, and a supportive owner who isn't afraid to trust his staff. He just knows how to pick the right people," Leo replied, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. Just then, a limousine pulled up to the entrance. An elderly woman with a kind, familiar face stepped out, assisted by a doorman. It was Dona Celia, now retired but a frequent and honored guest at the hotel. "Clara, Leonardo," she exclaimed, her face breaking into a wide grin as she walked toward them. "I just came by for my afternoon tea." "Celia, it's so good to see you," Clara said, giving the old woman a warm hug. "Your usual table is waiting." "Thank you, dear," Celia said, patting Clara's cheek. She then looked at Leo, her eyes twinkling. "You know, I told you that first night she was a good girl underneath it all. I'm glad to see you finally listened to an old woman's advice." Leo laughed. "It was the best advice I ever received." As Celia headed toward the tea room, Leo turned back to Clara, his expression growing more serious. "Speaking of good advice," he began, his voice dropping slightly, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He led her to a quiet alcove, away from the flow of guests. He took both of her hands in his blue eyes searching hers. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with a profound sincerity. "A year ago, we met in this very lobby. I was testing a hotel, and you were testing the limits of your ambition. We were two completely different people from two different worlds. But you taught me about humility, and I hope I helped you find your true strength. We saved each other, in a way." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to be the owner of the hotel you manage. I want to be your partner in everything for the rest of our lives. I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." With that, he slowly got down on one knee, right there on the polished marble floor of the Grand Celestial. He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring that sparkled with the light of 1,000 tiny suns. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me?" Tears of pure joy streamed down Clara's face. All the pain of her past, the years of striving, the moment of humiliation, it had all led her here, to this man, to this perfect, impossible moment. She was no longer a poor receptionist or an ambitious climber. She was a woman who knew her own worth, and she was loved by a man who saw it more clearly than anyone. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, Leo. Of course, yes." He slid the ring on her finger, a perfect fit. He stood up and pulled her into a passionate kiss, a kiss that sealed their past and promised their future. The guests and staff who happened to witness the scene broke in a spontaneous applause, celebrating the fairy tale that had unfolded right in their midst. In the heart of the Grand Hotel, the backpacker and the receptionist had finally found their forever. Their story wasn't just about a second chance. It was about the profound, transformative power of seeing beyond appearances and discovering the true value of a human heart. And that was the impressive story of Clara and Leonardo. What did you think? Let us know your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments below. And if you enjoy narratives that touch the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the Impressive Narratives channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Watch another emotional story now, appearing on your screen. Until next time,